Then Hezekiah invited all of Israel and Judah, with personal letters to Ephraim and Manasseh, to come to the temple of God in Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover to Israel's God. The king and his officials and the congregation in Jerusalem had decided to celebrate Passover in the second month. They hadn't been able to celebrate it at the regular time because not enough of the priests were yet personally prepared and the people hadn't had time to gather in Jerusalem. Under these circumstances, the revised date was approved by both king and people and they sent out the invitation from one end of the country to the other. From Beersheba in the south to Dan in the north, come and celebrate the Passover to Israel's God in Jerusalem. No one living had ever celebrated it properly. The king gave the orders, and the couriers delivered the invitations from the king and his leaders throughout Israel and Judah. The invitation read, O Israelites! Come back to God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, so that he can return to you who have survived the praying kings of Assyria. Don't repeat the sins of your ancestors who turned their backs on God, the God of their ancestors who then brought them to ruin. You can see the ruins all around you. Don't be bullheaded as your ancestors were. Clasp God's outstretched hand. Come to his temple of holy worship, consecrated for all time. Serve God, your God. You'll no longer be in danger of his hot anger. If you come back to God, your captive relatives and children will be treated compassionately and allowed to come home. Your God is gracious and kind and won't snub you. Come back and he'll welcome you with open arms. So the couriers set out, going from city to city through the country of Ephraim and Manasseh, as far north as Zebulun. But the people poked fun at them, treated them as a joke. But not all, some from Asher, Manasseh, and Zebulun weren't too proud to accept the invitation and come to Jerusalem. It was better in Judah. God worked powerfully among them to make it unanimous, responding to the orders sent out by the king and his officials, orders backed up by the word of God. It turned out that there was a tremendous crowd of people when the time came in the second month to celebrate the Passover, sometimes called the Feast of Unraised Bread. First they went to work and got rid of all the pagan altars that were in Jerusalem, hauled them off and dumped them in the Kidron Valley. Then, on the 14th day of the second month, they slaughtered the Passover lambs. The priests and Levites weren't ready, but now, embarrassed in their laziness, they consecrated themselves and brought whole burnt offerings to the temple of God. Ready now, they stood at their posts as designated by the revelation of Moses the holy man. The priests sprinkled the blood the Levites handed to them. Because so many in the congregation had not properly prepared themselves by consecration and so were not qualified, the Levites took charge of the slaughter of the Passover lamb so that they would be properly consecrated to God. There were a lot of people, especially those from Ephraim, Manasseh, Issachar, and Zebulun, who did not eat the Passover meal because they had not prepared themselves adequately. Hezekiah prayed for these as follows: May God who is all good, pardon and forgive everyone who sincerely desires God, the God of our ancestors. Even, especially, these who do not meet the literal conditions stated for access to the temple. God responded to Hezekiah's prayer and healed the people. All the Israelites present in Jerusalem celebrated the Passover, Feast of Unraised Bread, for 7 days, celebrated exuberantly. The Levites and priests praised God day after day, filling the air with praise sounds of percussion and brass. Hezekiah commended the Levites for the superb way in which they had led the people in the worship of God. When the feast and festival, that glorious 7 days of worship, the making of offerings, and the praising of God, the God of their ancestors, were over, the tables cleared and the floors swept, they all decided to keep going for another 7 days. So they just kept on celebrating, and as joyfully as they began. Hezekiah king of Judah gave 1,000 bulls and 7,000 sheep for the congregation's worship. The officials gave an additional 1,000 bulls and 10,000 sheep. And there turned out to be plenty of consecrated priests, qualified and well prepared. The whole congregation of Judah, the priests and Levites, the congregation that came in from Israel, and the resident aliens from both Israel and Judah, were all in on the joyous celebration. Jerusalem was bursting with joy. Nothing like this had taken place in Jerusalem since Solomon son of David king of Israel had built and dedicated the temple. The priests and Levites had the last word, they stood and blessed the people. And God listened as the ascending sound of their prayers entered his holy heaven. After the Passover celebration, they all took off for the cities of Judah and smashed the phallic stone monuments, chopped down the sacred Asherah groves, and demolished the neighborhood sex and religion shrines and local god shops. They didn't stop until they had been all through Judah, Benjamin, Ephraim, and Manasseh. Then they all went back home and resumed their everyday lives. Hezekiah organized the groups of priests and Levites for their respective tasks, handing out job descriptions for conducting the services of worship, making the various offerings, and making sure that thanks and praise took place wherever and whenever God was worshipped. He also designated his personal contribution for the whole burnt offerings for the morning and evening worship, for Sabbaths, for new moon festivals, and for the special worship days set down in the revelation of God. In addition, he asked the people who lived in Jerusalem to be responsible for providing for the priests and Levites so they, without distraction or concern, could give themselves totally to the revelation of God. As soon as Hezekiah's orders had gone out, the Israelites responded generously, first fruits of the grain harvest, new wine, oil, honey, everything they grew. They didn't hold back, turning over a tithe of everything. They also brought in a tithe of their cattle, sheep, and anything else they owned that had been dedicated to God. Everything was sorted and piled in mounds. They started doing this in the 3rd month and didn't finish until the 7th month. When Hezekiah and his leaders came and saw the extent of the mounds of gifts, they praised God and commended God's people Israel. Hezekiah then consulted the priests and Levites on how to handle the abundance of offerings. Azariah, chief priest of the family of Zadok, answered, "From the moment of this huge outpouring of gifts to the temple of God, there has been plenty to eat for everyone with food left over. God has blessed his people, just look at the evidence." Hezekiah then ordered storerooms to be prepared in the temple of God. When they were ready, they brought in all the offerings of tithes and sacred gifts. They put Conaniah the Levite in charge with his brother Shimei as assistant. Jehiel, Azachiah, Nahat, Asahel, Jerimoth, Jozabad, Eliel, Ismachiah, Mahat, and Benaiah were project managers under the direction of Conaniah and Shimei, carrying out the orders of King Hezekiah and Azariah the chief priest of the temple of God. Korah son of Imnah the Levite, security guard of the east gate, was in charge of the freewill offerings of God and responsible for distributing the offerings and sacred gifts. Faithful support out in the priestly cities was provided by Eden, Miniamin, Shua, Shemaiah, Amariah, and Shechaniah. They were even-handed in their distributions to their co-workers, all males 30 years and older, in each of their respective divisions as they entered the temple of God each day to do their assigned work. Their work was all organized by divisions. The divisions comprised officially registered priests by family and Levites 20 years and older by job description. The official family tree included everyone in the entire congregation, their small children, wives, sons, and daughters. The passionate dedication they showed in bringing themselves and their gifts to worship was total, no one was left out. The Aaronites, the priests who lived out on the pastures that belonged to the priests' cities, had reputable men on hand to distribute regular rations to every priest, everyone listed in the official family tree of the Levites. Hezekiah carried out this work and kept it up everywhere in Judah. He was the very best, good, right, and true before his God. Everything he took up, whether it had to do with worship in God's temple or the carrying out of God's law and commandments, he did well in a spirit of prayerful worship. He was a great success.